Good morning everyone. Basa na tayo ng Bible guys. 1 Chronicles chapter 25, 26, and 27. And John chapter 9 verse 1 to 23. Dito muna tayo sa John. Basa. Jesus tells the man who was born blind. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sent this man or his parents that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. But this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So verse 6. Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva. Kadiri man, oy. Sa verse 6 guys. Having said this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva. Hindi po pwede sa panahon natin ngayon, lalo may COVID-19, huwag talaga maglaro ng saliva natin. And put it on the man's eyes. Sabagay, kamot siya. Yung mud, tsaka yung ano. Ay, nako. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home saying, his neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging asked, isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg? Some claimed that he was. Others said, no, he only looks like him. But he himself insisted, I am the man. How then were your eyes opened? They demanded. He replied, the man they called Jesus made some mud and put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see. Where is this man? They asked him. I don't know, he said. Religious leaders questions the blind man. Siyempre nung pagka ganyan na papagaling ka, mababalita talaga kaagad yan. Ayan, question na siya ng mga religious leaders. So verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Issue talaga sa kanila yung Sabbath day, no? Therefore the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, how can a sinner do such miraculous signs? So they were divided. Finally they turned again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened. The man replied, he is a prophet. So prophet ang tawag niya kay Jesus. The Jews still did not believe that he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. Is this your son? They asked. Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? We know he is our son, the parents answered, and we know he was born blind. But how he can see now, or who opened his eyes, we don't know. Asked him. He is of age. He will speak for himself. Oo nga naman. Tinatanong pa talaga yung magulang. Nakakapagsalita naman yung blind. Yung dating blind. His parents said, this because they were afraid of the Jews, for already the Jews had decided that anyone who acknowledged that Jesus was the Christ would be put out of the synagogue. That was why his parents said, he is of age, asked him. A second time, they summoned the man who had been blind. Give glory to God. They said, we know this man is a sinner. He replied, whether he is a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I don't know, I was blind, but now I see. Then they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? He answered, I have told you already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Then they hurled insults at him and said, this fellow's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. Oh. So yung mga Pharisees, disciples of Moses daw sila. Ay, may mga Jews pala. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. Hindi nila kilala si Jesus, ano? Ah, yeah. Lumagpas na tayo, guys. Hanggang 23 lang tayo. Sorry. So, ulitin natin yung 23 na lang. That was why his parents said, he is of age, asked him. So, yun. Lumagpas man tayo. Sorry. Lagyan natin ng pantanta para mamaya. So, dito na tayo sa verse 25, 26, and 27. Baka lalagpas naman tayo din dito. Maganda kasi dito sa Old Testament kasi by chapters. Doon kasi sa New Testament, hinahati-hati. Kaya, hindi mo maiwasan, lalagpas talaga tayo. Chapter 25, 1 Chronicles. Basa. The singers, David together with the commanders of the armies set apart some of the sons of Asaph, Heman, and Jeduthun for the ministry of prophesying, accompanied by harps, lyres, and cymbals. Here is the list of the men who performed the service. From the sons of Asaph, Zachor, Joseph, Netaniah, and Asarela. The sons of Asaph were under the supervision of Asaph, who prophesied under the king's supervision. As for Jeduthun, from his sons, Gedaliah, Zeri, Jesiah, Shemi, Hashabiah, and Mattithiah, 6 in all, under the supervision of their father Jeduthun, who prophesied using the harp, in thanking and praising the Lord. As for Heman, from his sons, Bakiah, Mattaniah, Uziel, Shubael, and Jeremoth, Hananiah, Hanani, Eliata, Gidalti, and Romamti-Ezer, Josbekashah, Malote, Hoter, and Mahashiot. All these were sons of Heman the king's heir. They were given him to the promises. Mali nabasa ko. They were given him through the promises of God to exalt him. God gave Heman 14 sons and 3 daughters. Grabe no, ano yan, isang wife lang. 14 sons and 3 daughters. Tatanong lang. Ang dami naman guys. Yung nga lang 3, hirap na tayo manganak. Ito pa kayang 14. 14 sons and 3 daughters, the 17. Sa verse 6. All these men were under the supervision of their fathers for the music of the temple of the Lord, with cymbals, lyres, and harps for the ministry at the house of God. Asaph, Jeduthun, and Heman were under the supervision of the king, along with their relatives, all of them trained and skilled in music for the Lord. They numbered 288, young and old alike. Teacher as well as student cast lots for their duties. The first lot, which was for Asaph, fell Joseph, his sons and relatives. May nakalagay dito guys sa 12. Puro 12 naman eh. The second to Gedaliah, he and his relatives and sons, 12. The third to Zakur, excuse me, his sons and relatives, 12. The fourth to Israel, his sons and relatives, 12. The fifth to Netaniah, his sons and relatives. Sa verse 12. Sa verse 10 muna tayo. The third to Zakur, his sons and relatives, 12. Basta may nakalagay doon guys, 12 sa katapat ng pangalan nila. The fourth to Israel, his sons and relatives, 12. The fifth to Netaniah, his sons and relatives, 12. The sixth to Bechiah, his sons and relatives, 12. The seventh to Jezreel, his sons and relatives, 12. Basta 12 na lang lahat yan. Huwag ko na kayong bigkasin. Pinagpapawisan ako ng gusto. This sa 14. The seventh to Jezreel, his sons and relatives, 12. The eighth to Jeshaiah, his sons and relatives, 12. The ninth to Mattaniah, his sons and relatives, 12. The 10th to Shimei, his sons and relatives, 12. The 11th to Azarel, his sons and relatives, 12. The 12th to Hashabiah, his sons and relatives, 12. The 13th to Shobaal, his sons and relatives, 12. The 14th to Mattithiah, his sons and relatives, 12. The 15th to Jeremoth, his sons and relatives, 12. The 16th to Hananiah, his sons and relatives, 12. The 17th to Joshbekashah. Ay nako. Sa verse 24 guys. The 17th to Joshbekashah, his sons and relatives, 12. The 18th to Hanani, his sons and relatives, 12. The 19th to Malothi, his sons and relatives, 12. The 20th to Eliata, his sons and relatives, 12. The 21st to Hothar, his sons and relatives, 12. The 22nd to Gidalti, his sons and relatives, 12. The 23rd to Mahazioth, his sons and relatives, 12. The 24th to Romamti, Ezer, his sons and relatives, 12. The gatekeepers, ang dami nila sa no? Inuwa na tayo. Dito na tayo sa chapter 26. Yung unang natin binasa mga singers yun. Dito naman babasahin natin sa chapter 26, gatekeepers. The divisions of the gatekeepers. The Korahites, Meshelemiah, son of Kore, one of the sons of Asaph. Meshelemiah had sons Zechariah the firstborn, Jejael the second, Zebadiah the third, Jatniel the fourth, Elam the fifth, Jehohanan the sixth, and Elihonai the seventh. Obed-Edom also had sons: Shemaiah the firstborn, Jehozabad the second, Joah the third, Sakar the fourth, Nethanel the fifth, Amiel the sixth, Issachar the seventh, and Peolitai the eighth. For God had blessed Obed-Edom. His son Shemaiah also had sons who were leaders in their family and in their father's family, because they were very capable men. The sons of Shemaiah: Othniel, Raphael, Obed, and Elzabad. His relatives Elihu and Shemachiah were also able men. All these were descendants of Obed-Edom. They and their sons and their relatives were capable men with the strength to do the work. Descendants of Obed-Edom, 62 in all. Meshelemiah had sons and relatives who were able men, 18 in all. Hosea the Merarite had son Shimri the first, although he was not the firstborn. His father had appointed him the first. Hilkiah the second, Tabaliah the third, and Zechariah the fourth. The sons and relatives of Hosea were 13 in all. These divisions of the gatekeepers through their chief men had duties for ministering in the temple of the Lord, just as their relatives had. Lots were cast for each gate according to their families, young and old alike. The lot for the east gate fell Shelemiah. Then lots were cast for his son Zechariah, a wise counselor, and the lot for the north gate fell to him. The lot for the south gate fell to Obed-Edom, and lot for the storehouse fell to his sons. The lots for the west gate and the Shaleketh gate on the upper road fell to Shupim and Hosea. Gad was alongside of Gad. There were 6 Levites, they on the east, 4 they on the north, 4 a day on the north, 4 a day on the south, and 2 at a time at the storehouse. As for the court to the west, there were 4 at the road, and 2 at the court itself. These were the divisions of the gatekeepers, who were descendants of Korah and Merari, the treasurers and other officials. So verse 20, guys. Their fellow Levites were in charge of the treasuries of the house of God and treasuries for the dedicated things. Alam niyo guys, kahit naman basahin natin to ngayon, mga luma na to eh. Ang tanong ngayon, sino ngayon ang in charge sa mga gatekeepers, yung mga musicians, yung mga ganun. Kasi ito, sa tagal ng Bible na to, sinulat, mga patay na rin mga tao na to, diba? So, kahit basahin natin to ngayon, hindi na siya updated. Tanungin natin, sino na ba ang mga nakatalaga ngayon? So, kaya yung mga binabasa natin mga pangalan, mga nung araw pa yan. Katulad ngayon, sino na ba ang hari ng Israel? Diba? So, ulitin natin guys. The treasurers and other officials sa verse 20. Their fellow Levites were in charge of the treasurers of the house of God and treasuries for dedicated things. The descendants of Ladan, who were Gershonites, through Ladan, and who were heads of families belonging to Ladan and Gershonite, were Jehieli, the sons of Jehieli, Satan, and his brother Joel. They were in charge of the treasures of the temple of the Lord from the Aramites, the Izharites, the Hebronites, and Oshelites. Shebaal, a descendant of Gershom, son of Moses, was the officer in charge of the treasuries. His relatives through Eleazar, Rehabiah his son, Jeshaiah his son, Joram his son, Zechariah his son, and Shelomith his son. Shelomith and his relatives were in charge of all the treasuries of the things dedicated by King David, by the heads of families who were the commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, and by the other army commanders. Katulad niya, si King David pa ang hari nung araw. So, sa ngayon, sino na ang hari ng Israel? Tapos, itong mga to, sino na ang kapalit nila? Diba? Kaya kahit basahin natin itong mga pangalan dito, guys, hindi na nga tayo updated. Yung mga nung araw pa itong mga tao na to. So, verse 27. Some of the plunder taken in battle they dedicated for the repair of the temple of the Lord, and everything dedicated by Samuel the seer, and by Saul of Kish, Abner son of Ner, and Joab son of Sheroiah, and all the other dedicated things were in the care of Shelomith and his relatives. From the Isharites, Kenaniah and his sons were assigned duties away from the temple as officials and judges over Israel. From the Hebronites, Hashabiah and his relatives, 700 able men, were responsible in Israel west of the Jordan for all the work of the Lord and for the king's service. As for the Hebronites, Jeriah was their chief according to the genealogical records of their families. In the 40th year of David's reign, search was made in the records, and capable men among the Hebronites were found at Jezer in Galilee. Uriah had 2,700 relatives. 2,700 relatives. Pakarami naman. 2,700 is 2,700. 2,700 relatives. So it means 2,700 yan. 2,700. Yun. Sa verse 32 yun guys, ulitin natin. Jeriah had 2,700 relatives who were able men and heads of families, and King David put them in charge of the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, for every matter pertaining to God and for the affairs of the king. So, chapter 27 tayo, Army Divisions. Nilagyan ko na label para Army divisions. This is the list of the Israelites, heads of families, commanders of thousands, and commanders of hundreds, and their officers who served the king in all that concerned the army division that were on duty month by month throughout the year. Its division consisted of 24,000 men. In charge of the first division of the first month was sa army to guys, excuse me. In charge of the first division of the first month was Jashobim, son of Zabdiel. There were 24,000 men in his division. He was descendant of Perez and chief of all the army officers for the first month. In charge of the division for the second month was Dodai, the Ahohite. Alam niyo guys, nung araw kung army ka, parang pakiramdam ko sikat na sikat. Walang ginawa kasi kundi maghihira. Dodai the Ahite, Miklos, was the leader of his division. There were 24,000 men in his division. The third army commander for the third month was Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, the priest. He was chief, and there were 24,000 men in his division. This was the Benaiah who was a mighty man among the 30 and over the 30. His son Amizabad was in charge of his division. The fourth for the fourth month was Asahel, the brother of Joab. His son Zebadiah was his successor. There were 24,000 men in his division. Sa verse 8 ng chapter 27, 1 Chronicles, the fifth for the fifth month was the commander Shamoth, the Israelite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The sixth of the sixth month was Ira, the son of Achish, and Tekoite. Paano niyo babasahin Tekoite? There were 24,000 men in his division. Sa verse 10, the seventh for the seventh month was Helis, the Pelonite, the Ephraimite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The eighth for the eighth month was Sivikai, the Hushathite, Ezrahite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The ninth for the ninth month was Abizar, the Anatotite. A Benjamite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The tenth for the tenth month was Maharai, the Netophathite. A Zerahite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The eleventh for that 11th month was Benaiah, the Piratonite, and Ephraimite. There were 24,000 men in his division. The 12th for the 12th month was Heldai, the Netophathite, from the family of Othniel. There were 24,000 men in his division. Officers of the tribes. The officers over the tribes of Israel, over the Reubenites, Eliezer, son of Zikri, over the Shemonites, Shephatiah, son of Makkah, over Levi, Hashabiah, son of Kemuel, over Aaron, Zadok, and Judah, Elihu, a brother of David, over Issachar, Omri, son of Michael, over Zebulun, Ishmaiah, son of Obadiah, over Naphtali, Jeremoth, son of Ashriel, over the Ephraimites, Hoshi, son of Azaziah, over half the tribe of Manasseh, Joel, son of Pedaiah, Joel, son of Pedaiah. Sa verse 21, over the half tribe of Manasseh. Kaboring man ito. Puro man pangalan. Nabuboard ako magbasa. Puro pangalan. Ang hirap pabigkasin. Katwiran ko kasi wala na sila eh. Tapos nakasulat pa rin sila dito sa Bible. Dapat kung sa bagay, paano malilimbag yung updated ngayon kung sino-sino yung mga bagong in charge, diba? So verse 21, over the half tribe of Manasseh and Galilee, Iddo, son of Zechariah, over Benjamin, Jashiel, son of Abner, over Dan, Azarel, son of Jeroham. These were the officers over the tribes of Israel. So verse 23, David did not take the number of the men 20 years old or less because the Lord had promised to make Israel tingnan mo lang yung basa ko guys sa nabilugan kasi ay nako ulit. David did not take the number of the men 20 years old or less because the Lord had promised to make Israel as numerous as the stars in the sky. Yun na nga eh, in the sky. Nagpakarami kayo pero wala kayong sariling lupa. Dumayo lang kaya sila dyan. Tapos wala na. Nagyera-gyera na sa Canaan. Joab, son of Zeruiah, began to count the men but did not finish. Wrath came on Israel. Ayan na. Wrath came on Israel on account of this numbering, and the number was not entered in the book of the annals of King David. The king overseers, Asmaveth, son of Ajiel, was in charge of the royal storehouses. Pinagpapawisan na ako. Ilang minuto na tayo, 30 minutes na tayo nagbabasa. Hindi pa rin tapos. Ulitin ulit na. The king's overseers, sa verse 25. Ashmabeth, the son of Achiel, was in charge of the real storehouses. Jonathan, son of Uzziah, was in charge of the storehouses in the outlying districts, in the towns, the villages, and the watchtowers. Israel, son of Caleb, was in charge of the field workers who farmed the land. Shimei, the Ramathite, was in charge of the vineyards. Zabdi, the shipmite, was in charge of the produce of the vineyards for the wine vats. Baal-Hanan, the Gederite, was in charge of the olive and sycamore fig trees in the western foothills. Joash was in charge of the supplies of olive oil. Shitrai, the Sharonite, was in charge of the herds grazing in Sharon. Shaphat, son of Adlai, was in charge of the herds in the valleys. Obel, the Ismailite, was in charge of the camels. Judea, paano ba ito basahin? Judea, the Meronothite, was in charge of the donkeys. Jaziz, the Hagrite, was in charge of the flocks. All these were the officials in charge of King David's property. Jonathan, David's uncle, was a counselor, a man of insight, and a scribe. Jehiel, son of Hakmoni, tingnan mo lang guys, took care of the king's sons. Ahithophel was the king's counselor. Hushai, the Archite, was the king's friend. Ahithophel was succeeded by Jehoiada, son of Benaiah, and by Abiathar. Tingnan mo, ang swerte ni Hushai. Kasi siya lang sa dami ng friend ni Kings, ng Kings, siya lang ang nabanggit na kaibigan. Ahithophel was succeeded by Jehoiada, son of Benaiah, and by Abiathar. Joab was the commander of the royal army. So, yun na guys. At tumutulo na pawis ko. Tingnan mo, basang-basa yung libro, yung Bible. Yung pawis ng kamay ko. Bye everyone. God bless.